How's it going, boys and ghouls, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast, and welcome to the second ever episode of Hidden Horror. Yes, it's episode number 2. This could be our sophomore slump or our comeback of the year. It's up for you guys to decide. And today we're discussing a film I've wanted to talk about on the show for a very long time. It's called Toad Road. It's a film from all the way back in 2012. I had watched it for the first time this year with Midnight Miles, and since we watched it together, I couldn't wait to actually record this podcast and talk about it. This is actually one of the episodes that inspired the podcast. And we'll get right to the episode in a little bit, but I realized we didn't really discuss the exact plot of the film, so I'm just going to read the Letterboxd description for you guys really fast about Toad Road, just to kind of set the tone for how we're going to get into this episode for you guys, to kind of set the mood, set the pace, and kind of describe what this film is about in a little bit. So as I said, Toad Road from 2012, it was directed by Jason Banker, a cool 76 minutes long, so it's a very quick watch. Stuck in a dead-end town, young James kills times with his druggy friend, engaging in debauched chemical intake to the point of unconsciousness, until he meets Sarah, a sweet new arrival to their group. However, Sarah wants James to take her further into the world of narcotics experimentation, just as James was contemplating abandoning this lifestyle altogether. And she also wants him to introduce her to the sinister local legend of Toad Road, a spot deep in the forest that is apparently home to the 7 Gates of Hell. These 7 Gates of Hell are actually inspired by the local legend of York, Pennsylvania, where the film takes place. Again, it's a great film. It was a fun episode to record, and we're going to get to it right in a second. But if you guys haven't already, please make sure you're subscribing to my YouTube channel, subscribing to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to the show. Make sure you're clicking that subscribe button, leaving me a rating and a review if it allows you to do so. And with that, we're just going to get right to the episode, you guys. So now it's time to get spooky.
Hey listeners out there, welcome back to another episode of Buddy's House of Horror presents Hidden Horror. I'm Midnight Miles, and of course we are here with the host.
I don't know if I go by Buddy the Bruiser on this show, but we'll just say I'm Buddy from Buddy's House of Horror, although today we're actually recording from the Midnight Manor, which is where we watched the film we're going to be talking about today. A film that's had a long history with Miles, a film that he saw many moons ago. He's bringing it back for Hidden Horror, the second ever episode of Hidden Horror. So we're excited to really dive right into this film here. Miles, would you like to sort of just give us an introduction to how you came to be aware of this film? How did you see it for the first time? And kind of like what impact did it leave on you where you wanted to sort of revisit it? I mean, over a decade later at this point. This came out in 2013. I don't know if you saw it around the same time.
So the film is called Toad Road. It is an independent film. The initial release, it's like there are multiple things to say, 2012, 2013, like somewhere in those couple years, like it had its premiere and then rental and DVD and all that.
So I've got the information right in front of me. If you want the exact dates.
Okay.
Well, I didn't write down the exact date, but I have the years. So it premiered at the Fantasia Film Festival in July of 2012. It actually won a couple awards there. It won Best Director and Best Actor. It won Best Feature Film at another independent underground film festival in 2012, and it had a very limited theatrical release in October of 2013. It was just in New York and LA, and then it was subsequently released on DVD and video on demand that December, so December 2013.
I'm assuming, I feel like I had seen this before December 2013, but then I'm like, there's probably just like no way. It just feels like I saw it when I was like a little younger than I was at that time. But I think I just read. I used to do a lot of reading, on horror. That's where most of the stuff for me is just reading magazines and books. Like, honestly, like, it's funny. Like, people watch trailers to get hyped on stuff. I'd rather actually read about a film.
Yeah.
I get more excited reading and then just going in based on, like, the synopsis or, like, what an article tells me or what an article hypes me up. I think I read about this in some film magazine. Like, I'm pretty sure that's how it started. it's not like a great story, but I can't remember if I rented it on demand or if it was through possibly Netflix discs at that point.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, probably
It wasn't.
something
It
like
wasn't
that.
streaming. It wasn't. I don't like. It was somehow I'd gotten a hold of it, and at the time, I guess if it was the end of 2013, I probably would have been like just the right age, maybe a little bit older than the kids in the film, where it was kind of coming out of like a group of friends that a less self-destructive group of friends, but similar group of friends, similar parties, and similar stuff like that that's presented in the film. I guess I should say maybe a little bit about the basic synopsis of the film. It really follows, like documentary style, a group of kids in York, Pennsylvania. I've been to York, Pennsylvania, actually. Stayed the night there once. I like York, Pennsylvania, actually. Just throwing that out there. If any listeners are from York. But it kind of follows like them partying, their friendships. There is a lot of drug use in this film. It kind of follows the downfall of one girl who gets kind of brought into this group, and how she goes from being basically just a normal girl to just loving drugs.
Yeah.
It's kind of her descent into madness, I guess I'll say, to a degree, because she becomes obsessed with kind of like, other dimensions, otherworldly stuff, and there's a local urban legend about there being a trail that goes into the 7 gates of hell, and she kind of obsesses over it, and then obviously, I mean, I think you can tell where this is going. It kind of leads into eventually getting to that point. I don't know, your thoughts on what I've said so far?
I mean, that's a pretty good synopsis of the film. Obviously, we'll get into some of the story elements and what we think about it. We'll keep this sort of beginning portion spoiler-free, and then we'll get into some of the juicier stuff later on for those that want to stick around. But this first portion will be spoiler-free. Just in general, for a film that I watched for the first time this year, I have such a nostalgic place in my heart for this film, I guess. Because, as you alluded to, I mean, you, at the time of this film came out, you might have been a little bit older than them, but just the style of clothes that they're wearing, they all have, like, their emo haircuts and stuff like that. Like, I grew up in this time period. Like, I grew up, obviously, without the drug use, but the going to parties, hanging out with your friends, the basement shows, the music, staying up all night doing this and that. Like, it just is so... It's such, like, a coming-of-age film for our generation.
Yeah.
It shows, like, a very dark side of the coin of that, but I feel like everyone, especially, like, in our hometown, and, I mean, we live in Ohio, which is not far off from where this film was shot and based in, you either knew these kids or you were these kids.
Yeah.
So, it's just, in general, like, the film just kind of hits, like, real home for me. Really makes me miss playing in bands and hanging out with all the people I hung out with back in the day. Just in general, I think it's like the perfect length for a horror film. It is very slow paced. I would honestly call it more of a drama with horror elements to it.
I agree.
But in general, like I've only seen it the one time, but I really enjoyed the film. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be recommending it here for you guys. Obviously, it is probably one of the most anti-drug films unintentionally, I guess, because like if you read a little bit of the background of this story, it's heavily documented that all of the drugs that they were using were real, and they actually were using the drugs on film. And I guess the director kind of has a little bit of controversy, like later on as some of the actors came out. Like, not that he was encouraging them to do all these drugs, but he was definitely sort of an enabler to kind of get what was best for the film.
Right.
So it does have a little bit of a dark history to it. But it made a name for itself. Obviously, it premiered at these festivals, got the attention of executive producer Elijah Wood, who was just going to see it. He had no intentions of acquiring it or like buying anything at this festival, but he was really moved by the film, and he says it really pushes like the boundaries of what you can consider horror. And he again like emphasizes that the film was probably 70% documentary and 30% horror film.
Right.
Again, it's documented. Things were very real, down to even the relationships between the characters. The main two leads are Sarah and James, who at the time were not in a relationship, but they become in a relationship in the film, which is something that happened also in real life.
Right.
Because Sarah was actually with this Whitley person who is also in the film, and there's sort of a bizarre love triangle going on in the film,
Right.
and that was on screen and off screen as well. But yeah, I mean, in general, I really love the film. It has a little bit of a dark history, but overall, I think it is. Again, if you come from the same background that we come from, like, I would say, not that it's like a must-watch, but I think if you do seek it out, you will probably enjoy it.
I think kind of like maybe we'll elaborate a little bit more on those aspects of it where, you know, I don't think there's a lot of films that maybe capture what it was like in some of these small towns, because obviously it's like a very big small town type film where you have these communities that, you know, I mean, these people really rely on each other for like the music scene, for entertainment, for, you know, all of this. So you have this tight-knit group of people that I feel like small towns, especially at the time, were kind of like breeding. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, you know, a lot of these kids, especially like maybe like us included, I mean, yes, we could go to Cleveland, some of these places back in the day, but it was...
Well, like most nights, you're just like, all right, we're all hanging out. Like in our case, we're all hanging out at Jared's house, at the street house, or like whatever it is. And like that's like the thing about the like what I enjoy most about the film is those beginning segments, like before it's even a horror film, where it's just everyone just hanging out, like trying to make the most out of a town that was similar to ours. Like they probably don't have like a mall. Like our hometown didn't even get a Chipotle until a couple years ago.
Yeah,
like, just it really captures that Midwest Appalachian like life that we lived. So
unfortunately, thankfully for us in the music scene and the things that we were into, there wasn't a lot of drug use. But I actually don't think that that's like the norm.
No,
Of like what you see in the film. That's why I want to elaborate more on that. Is there's not a lot of places to go. These kids all seem to come from pretty working class, like upbringing, stuff like that. Not a lot of money, not a lot of places to go. So they're going to sit around and do drugs. I mean, that's kind of like, I mean, like you said a bit ago, almost like the perfect anti-drug film, because you see, especially, I like the arc where the main girl, she's, you know, just kind of like meets a guy, gets interested, or has people to bring him into this group. And then she goes from doing nothing and like it's like a studying college student to being like a complete burnout within probably a few months span. You know what I mean? As the film progresses, and it's sad. Unfortunately, I think, you know, we're coming up the right generation where that stuff was starting to happen more. Like more so, there's more visibility to it. Does that make sense? You know, you started to see these things. I am very thankful to say that I don't have any close friends that I know of that have gone through stuff of like to this degree where I've just watched them basically like disintegrate almost and become like a completely different person due to drugs and stuff.
Yeah. Thankfully, at that time, myself and the majority of my friends were all straight edge.
Yeah, there you go.
But the partying and going crazy was still a big part of the culture.
Let's talk more about, like, let's go over some other stuff, like the storytelling, or like how, you know, talk about maybe more how it was shot or stuff like that, kind of give people a little bit more of an idea of what the film's about.
Obviously, very low budget. As I said, all of the characters are pretty much playing like faux versions of themselves. Like all the actors, the characters are the same name, and it seems like a lot of the film was just them like hanging out, like doing whatever. So it's shot like in that documentary style, almost as like you're a fly on the wall, kind of just witnessing all these events take place. I can tell you were about to say something, so go ahead.
No. I was going to say, would you say maybe the first 45 minutes of the film is straight documentary? Because that's kind of like what I'm thinking in the last 30 to 40 minutes are almost, I don't want to say straight documentary, I'm sure there's some things were elaborated, but it feels pretty much like, even the urban legend stuff, I'm pretty sure is like a local urban legend, and then the last like 30 to 40 minutes, all of a sudden it takes like a complete dark turn, and that's where it really becomes a horror film.
Yeah, so like during these beginning portions, I will say it is pretty much a documentary. You're just there, you're hanging out. There are small glimpses of horror within. Obviously, as we said, I mean, these guys are doing shrooms, they're doing whatever. Like, I remember one scene in particular, towards the beginning, like maybe in the first third, they go down into this cave to do shrooms, and it's the big deal because it's the one girl's first time
right.
doing stuff like that. So there is a little bit of a drug trip kind of scene in there. So I will say that, like, it's not a 100% slow burn. Like, there are still some things keeping you invested to get to the ending portion of it. And then once you get to the beginning portion, it still does kind of feel like a documentary. Like, I feel like the whole thing, you kind of get that vibe because the first 45 minutes are leading up to going to this Toad Road. And then there's the aftermath segment of what happens when you get back, or maybe you don't. But it still feels very documentary-esque. Like, how do you cope with this situation? How are you going to live through this? Go ahead.
One of the benefits, I think, of this film is if this was maybe, like, let's say a bigger independent production or a main film, they would have done all the beginning stuff, stretched it out, maybe add some horror elements, and then once they got to, let's say, now I'm going to say, if you haven't watched it, you want to watch it, stop the podcast, because I'm now going to transfer to spoiler territory.
There we go, spoiler territory, yeah.
But there's a scene where the girl, the main lead, is gone. I mean, they keep going through, quote unquote, the gates of hell, this trail, this never-ending trail, and the boy's lost, everything's lost, and all of a sudden, I'm not going to spoil everything, by the way, but he wakes up, she's gone, it's been X amount of time later, I'm not going to spoil some of that, and now the kid has to go on living with his life, and this is where things, I really like watching him and his kind of descent in all of the decisions that he makes, all really to his detriment, because I feel like this is something that someone without true life experience would make all the decisions that he makes in the film.
Right, because, I mean, he's still an early 20-something, and, like, you got to think of it this way, like, he was already directionless as it was.
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty clear, like, these guys or whatever, like, they don't have, like, they're not working full-time jobs, they're just kind of doing whatever to get by. But then, after the disappearance, all of his friends move out of town. He's being hunted by the law, basically, because they think he is responsible for this disappearance. No one has seen him up until this X amount of time goes by, and she's still missing. So obviously he is the only suspect in this. He's like living in a, basically I think it's like his uncle's barn. Yeah, so like, you can see how someone, given these circumstances in life leading up to this point, would make the same decisions he's making. And again, that's where it becomes like this sort of sad, dark documentary thing on top of the horror that's going on.
It's almost like a different level of horror, where depending on your mood or what you're going into, especially the last half or so, I mean, it's very depressing, especially if, let's say, you come from backgrounds like we've talked about a little bit on this, with like the music scene, similar small town background stuff. It's like, could you see yourself falling into a trap like this if things were slightly different for you? Like, as a person, could you see yourself, like...
Oh, if I was dealt the same cards, like, I mean, like,
Yeah.
thankfully that never happened to us or anyone that we knew.
Yeah.
But, like, that's something very realistic that you could see happening. And, I mean, like, our hometown had these urban legends, too. Like,
Yeah.
you could... Like, not saying that it's a bad film or anything, but, like, you literally could have shot this with zero budget. You just need a little bit of computer tricks to do some of the editing. Like, literally, this is something we could have shot about going to Tinker's Hollow or something like that.
Right.
Like, every small town has their small town legends. The Seven Gates of Hell is just where this happens to take place. So, again, it's very relatable for me in that aspect, too, just because it was made on a shoestring budget. Yeah, so...
The last... Do you want to go over anything that maybe you like about, like, towards the ending? I mean, I don't want to spoil the whole ending or stuff like that, or any more notes about the production and stuff before we start giving some final thoughts here in a minute?
I guess the only thing that I guess we should mention that we haven't already is that the film is dedicated to the main actress, Sarah, who did happen to pass away from a drug overdose right after the film had premiered. So just, again, another sad situation all the way around. I guess after they shot the film, because I think they started, like, prepping for this or whatever in, like, 2007 or 2008, like, maybe when the first...
You can tell, at least, I would say, and I haven't done the full research, but, like, even as I was watching it for the first time, I'm like, time has passed. Like, there may be, like, I could see it being them filming on and off over the course of, like, a year or something. Like, I don't even know, because you would see at times haircuts are different, things are different. I mean, it's...
I want to say, I don't have all the information in front of me, but I remember reading, I think they wrapped in around 2010, so it did take about 2 years to get it edited and out to festivals or whatever.
Yeah.
But in between the time that they shot it, I mean, Sarah, she had been in, like, a Dashboard Confessional music video. She'd moved to New York. She was getting, like, little roles here and there. But just like her character in the film, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. So I will say, if these things hit too close to home for you, that would be the only person I would not recommend this to, maybe. But I will say, from that generation, let's say, like, from, like, late 2000s to early 2010s and stuff, if you grew up in that time, I do think this is an essential viewing, especially if you're into some, like, alternative music, horror, any of the small town trapping stuff we talked about. I would highly recommend this, because I have not seen another film, really, when I think about it, that captures that time period. And let's say Hollywood or independent film hasn't really gotten up to the late 2000s yet. You know what I mean? Where they're starting to find nostalgia for it. Everything is still 80s and 90s.
Like, shit, we haven't even gotten really a lot of early 2000s period pieces.
Yeah.
So, like, it really captures that time period very well. I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit.
It's okay.
But
I'm going all over the place with it. I would have liked to seen... The director has one other film. I'm kind of going on a little thing here, but I haven't seen it. I know that he continued to work in the film industry in other aspects. I would have liked to seen, especially I remember when I watched this, I would have liked to see this director do more than I think that he did, but I think he went into other aspects of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Do you know? Because
I don't know. Yeah, I didn't really look into that, yeah.
Like, was some of the controversy, is that why he shied away from directing more than... Because he did do a film after this. I have not seen it. I forget what the name is. It's a more traditional film. But then I saw he was doing, like, cinematography. He was doing other stuff. So he definitely continued working in the film industry, but just not as a writer-director, it looks like.
So Jason Banker is his name. Yeah, it looks like he's gotten really into cinematography, because that's where the majority of his credits are now. I mean, he's still working today doing a lot of different stuff. but as a director, he's done Toad Road. He did another film called Felt a couple years later. It says that he has another film in production, but I don't know how up to date this is. It's called Squatter. It says it's in post-production, so I guess he shot it already. So we'll see. It also says that's a documentary drama, so I have a feeling it might be very similar to Toad Road. But if you want, like, a real slice-of-life film with some horror mixed into it, again, you have to kind of be in the right mindset to watch this. Obviously, it's not the most entertaining all the way throughout. It is a slow burn. It's kind of like, I guess the way I would describe it is like you're watching someone's really, like, screwed-up home movie. Is like a good way to kind of, like, you kind of feel like, when you're watching this, you kind of feel like you're watching, I don't know, you found someone's home video at Salvation Army, which I've done, and then added that to your collection, so.
Well, I think I kind of said what I guess I need to say about this. It's hard because this is so independent that I don't feel like there's a lot of information. There's not a lot of... I really don't know anyone else that's ever seen this besides me. I will say on a final thing, I looked for this film on and off to own for literally almost a decade until I found it last year with a bunch of other used Blu-rays and stuff like that. And this, I mean, as we've said, this artsploitation films, I think this is just somebody printed this, just themselves and did like a nice, I mean, it's got pretty nice packaging.
Well, I will say it. So me and you are the only ones that have watched this on Letterboxd. So, well, out of the people I follow. So for those of you who haven't seen it that are listening to this, go rate it on Letterboxd. Try to get the word out there about it. It is available on DVD and Blu-ray now. It's actually available at Target online. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, so it is available to get. I'm sure Amazon has it.
It was weird. It took me.
So
I don't. I wonder. Did maybe someone else put it out on Blu-ray?
Maybe they might have gotten a newer release of it, but it is available. I'm sure it's online somewhere at this point too.
It's got to be for rent or some video on demand. But
so I would say check it out. You got anything else to say to close us out here? Or?
I would just say highly recommend it if you are in your 30s and need some nostalgia. Yeah. So that's all I got.
Well, all right. Well, we will see you guys for another episode of Hidden Horror coming very, very soon. Miles and I are actually about to watch a couple films right now, which could maybe be potential episodes in the future, but we won't spoil it in case we watch them and it's a total bust. So,
well, I can say that I fell asleep watching half of the one film the other night. I was going to make a really bad joke I'll make off air, but it's not a total bust. Anyways.
First one. Thanks for checking out another episode of Hidden Horror, and go check out Toad Road.
Thanks, guys.
Well, that's about it for this time, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Hidden Horror. Again, if you haven't already, please make sure you're subscribing to my YouTube channel and subscribing to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to the show. Let me know. Spread the good word of the House of Horror. Let your friends know about it. And with that, we'll see you guys back here for another episode of Buddy's House of Horror coming at you very, very soon. So take care and stay spooky.